listening and discussing throughout the day today, I thought that probably the main topic, or one of the main topics on the empirical, the visible, the evident level is this issue of media bodies or mediated bodies or media and bodies. And I think that's not a new topic, but that there are also new issues. We heard about this media body topic, for example, in the context of imaging regimes today in the morning. We heard about media as 2D, bodies as 3D. We heard about network images and the palimpsest concept, then about neoliberal embodiment. So we had several ways of looking or understanding this relation of media and bodies. And the question I would like to raise, or I think it would be interesting to go on and discuss further, what are the continuities and which are the differences in historic modes of media bodies? I would state that the relationship between embodiment practices, I increasingly refuse to talk about the body. So embodiment practices on the one hand and media on the other is not new at all. It's been there ever since. But media do change. So we have specific media, and we have specific people using or not using, being excluded from or included in certain media, etc. But I just, was thinking, for example, about the mirror in Lacan and others, which is a very flat and very two-dimensional medium, for example. But then we have debates coming from phenomenology and philosophy, which also have for long now stressed that there is an important co-constitution between these two spheres, the embodiment and the media. So the question is, what is made, and we've been discussing, I think, a core of our discussion was this, what is made visible and what is invisibilized in this co-constitutive entanglement of media and bodies, in which way and by and for whom. So how does it happen? How are some excluded? How are others included? And how does this work? This is something we have been working on, and I think that's one of the most general things that one can learn by, for example, studying the Kardashians or Adele. That would be maybe the next symposium. And what I wanted to indicate with these images is, and that's is she still there? The one who talked about the images of the beauty protesting things in the second wave. Well, these images. There. Sorry, I just didn't. Because that's sorry. This is an image exactly from this context. So the critique of media as being harmful, as being the dynamic that puts labels and reduces, especially women, but also other persons to meat. That's the thing here. And the critique of media as false and an estrangement to the real lived body. And I find it very interesting, just to give other examples, Lady Gaga, for example, in her MTV Video Awards speech and staging, I think 2012 or so, she appeared in this meat dress which has a long feminist genealogy as art and performance form. So the meat, for example, the label of women's bodies being meat and being objectified in culture as meat is one of this entanglement relations, and this can be staged and practiced. This critique can be practiced in different ways. We also talked about the social situation in which all this happens right now, and I think that's something we maybe didn't address enough. But on the other hand, there are certain concepts that came back several times. The social situation is one of neoliberal governmentality, as Foucault and many others have said. And I think this is something we should talk maybe more about. I think this also includes a massive social, cultural, economic precarization. Would you say so here? Is that, yeah? It's maybe very German or from other places. Precarization, and it's only new in certain centers of the global north. It's always ever been the situation of the global south, but it implies a certain loss of normality, of certainty, of what we thought was a consensus, a loss of hegemony, and that's a very dynamic social situation in the so-called global north, and I think a lot of what we have been discussing, for example, with the Kardashians, I would put it in such a framing. I will come to that at the end. So that's also part of, or that goes along with this neoliberal governmentality, where, and that's a point I would make very strong and I would stress maybe for discussion, we really have a fetishization of individual autonomy, and where dependence or vulnerability is the monstrous, the abject, and that's part of this regime, which on the level of the subject, the person, the practices of the individual leads to this idea and ideal of the entrepreneurial or managerial self. I'm sure this is not new for all of you, but what I missed a little bit maybe today in discussions is the ambivalence of this situation. I think we all have a very critical understanding of this as this is very problematic, this is very difficult, this is very disciplining, this is very repressive, but I think there is a lot of ambivalence infused in this historical, this social situation. And this ambivalence is what makes it so appealing and so hegemonic, so dominant. This ambivalent situation refers to that what we have right now as neoliberal self, as the entrepreneurial self, as the governmental neoliberal situation is a rather direct result of very progressive social movements in the 70s and 80s. And I'm not talking fault, I'm not talking knowing, I'm not talking anything, but I'm talking of historical dynamics. So we had empowerment practices, we had visibility politics, we had pro-choice mobilizations, civil rights movements in the US especially. We had the new social left movements all over Europe and in Latin America and in many parts of the world, which somehow all stressed the idea of the autonomous individual, of the person that has to liberate itself, herself, himself with others. But the idea of the right to your own choice, the right to decide over your own body, the right to be yourself, express yourself, empower yourself, is one that's very much rooted in this situation of the social movements of the body and goes along. And I think one of the practical forms of this situation was the ever so free, and I think an idea that can't be overestimated, the denaturalization of the body, the ontologization, I don't know, of the body. So taking the body away from the idea that it's given, that it's the genes, that it's determined, that it's faith, but rather stressing the idea that you are what you make of yourself, and that especially includes the body, that especially includes somatic aspects of empowerment. And I think that's what makes the situation so ambivalent. I tried to put it in little images, so maybe the ambivalence would be seen. We have this old, I mean, it goes back to the Second World War, but it's been a very long around feminist image, this we can do it, and what has somehow become, or it's very related, so to Michelle Obama's arms.